I'm really excited to have you in the courses.
I'm excited to be in them and learn more about how to do better on the LSAT. I've obviously took it twice, so third time's the charm.
Great, great, awesome. Well, hopefully it'll be third is the last one, and your fingers crossed exactly. And so I'm hoping to just learn a little bit more about what led you to join the courses and what you're hoping to get out of them.
Yeah, so I took the LSAT in June and in July. And when I took it in June, and previously I had taken a course through my university that was just learning all about the basics, whether it be logic games, logical reasoning, and I felt like I had a pretty good idea of the fundamentals. But when I took the June LSAT and I got a 158, and then I took the July LSAT, and just internally I didn't think I did that well as I wanted to. I kind of told myself that I needed to really buckle down, at least for the next couple months, so I can get a better score on the third time and enough in time to apply in the fall. So yeah, that's why I decided to join the courses, because I thought it would boost my score by a little bit, hopefully, and give me that extra push.
Sure, awesome. Well, I'm glad to help, and I'm
Yeah.
excited to see that you're diving into everything already. I know that you had some questions for me, and I'd be happy to cover at least some of those with you today. So out of the ones that you sent, which would you say is the most pressing? What's the number one thing on your mind?
The number one thing I think is one of the first questions I had is how to complete the logical reasoning sections despite flagging, because what I noticed when I took the July LSAT was I went through the method of flagging the ones I didn't know, because I didn't want to waste time on trying to understand the stimulus and figure that out. So by the end of the section, I had, you get the little 5-minute warning on the tablet, and I had like 5 to 6 questions that I flagged, and I started to freak out because I knew that I couldn't get that in time. So I just ended up guessing on a couple of them, and I don't want that to happen again. So I want to know, what is the best method for increasing time management? Is it just practicing, or
Yeah, sure. Well, practice is always key for whatever you're doing, right? But I want to go deeper than just telling you to practice, because there are some specific tactics you can use to better deal with a situation like that. So first off, 5, 6 questions, flagging, coming back at the end. That strikes me as reasonable. I mean, personally, I'll typically flag 4 to 5, so we're in the same ballpark there. Now, the idea is, what do you do when you are at the end, you have that time back, you have to decide what to go back to. The first thing is, I would say, how can you increase the size of your time bank? How can you have more time remaining at the end? And the answer to me would be, you speed through the easier questions. Like, you aim to do the first 10 questions in about 10 to 12 minutes, much less than the average time allotted. What if instead of having 5 minutes remaining, you could have 7 or 8 minutes remaining? Or what if you could potentially flag 1 or 2 questions less? How would that change your situation at the end of the section?
Yeah, I think, and I try to stay in the doing 10 questions in 10 minutes mark. I try to hit that. It's a little bit difficult, but I know generally the first 10 questions are easier, right, than the rest. Yeah. I think with me, it's like reading through every answer choice. Even in the first 10 questions, I second guess myself. I'm like, okay, let me make sure that B, it's not B, C, or D. If I know it's A, let me just make sure, cover my bases. So I think that's what makes me go a little bit slower, is that I have to read every single answer choice. So
It's okay to read every choice. I think that's typically a good thing to do. Logical reasoning has ambiguities of language that logic games does not, of course. So it is worthwhile to go through all 5 choices. And of course, if it was A, maybe you were wasting your time. But on the other hand, A might seem tempting, but when you're speeding through, but there's something that's even better as choice E. I think it is worth typically going through all 5. The thing is, not second guessing yourself, though, not rechecking, double checking, triple checking an easy question. You find yourself doing that?
Yeah, I find myself doing that, just doing a double take oftentimes, and second guessing, oh, it can be this, it could be that. And then I check my answers when I'm practicing, and I notice that I initially chose the right one, and then I second guessed and I chose the wrong one. And I'm like, I had the right answer all along, and I just erased it. So that's really frustrating. But yeah, that's definitely something I'm going to work on. Another question I have is with reading comprehension. Specifically, how to I end up getting, I think reading comp is definitely my weaker section of the three. And I was wondering, when we're doing practice tests and we're reviewing the next day, sometimes I don't necessarily remember the passage the next day. Is it better, do you recommend when you're reviewing the questions you got wrong, rereading the entire passage? Or what's the best method for reviewing a reading comp instead of just saying, oh, okay, that's the right answer, I get it, and then just move on?
That's a great question. I guess the question to that is, what are you looking to get out of your review process? Because that will affect how you review. Maybe you want to review the same exact day immediately afterwards so that all of your thought process is fresh. Like everything about what you just did, you could review an hour later or 2 hours later when everything in your mind is fresh about what exactly you were thinking in the moment, why you were considering a particular answer choice. Or if you want to redo everything untimed and then analyze your thought process afterwards, maybe you want to leave a day or two in between.
Mm-hmm. So either I could do it the day of, or just read it, be super thorough, and do it if I'm doing it the day after, or a couple days after.
Yeah. And so to answer your question directly, I do think you need to reread the passage when you're reviewing in order to thoroughly understand everything, because you got to know why the right answer was right, why the wrong one was wrong, but more than that, why the tempting wrong answer was tempting and why the discouraging right answer was discouraging. And a lot of times that will relate to key words and phrases in the passage, but you have to know about the passage in order to evaluate them properly. Everything only makes sense in the context of the passage. Just like in logical reasoning, an answer choice only makes sense in the context of the stimulus.
Okay. Thank you. The next question I had was about kind of what to do when you notice your mind starting to, especially when you're doing reading comp, where your mind's starting to trail off and you're starting to think about, you go into panic mode, and then you realize 3 minutes of reading, I didn't even understand or grasp any of what I just read. What to do in those circumstances? I mean, do you just check yourself really quick? And because sometimes when you start to think about other things, it just snowballs, and then you say, hey, I have 10 minutes left. I don't know what to do, and I'm freaking out.
Yeah, sure. Great question. This happens so much because reading comp is incredibly boring. So that's totally understandable. And part of that relates to reading with a purpose, reading with the structure of the passage in mind. So as you're reading, you've got to constantly be asking yourself, what role does this play in the passage? Is it a viewpoint? Is it an opinion, a theory, a hypothesis, essentially a conclusion? Or is it evidence and details and supporting examples? Or is it a person or a group of people advocating something? So constantly categorizing the information that you're receiving into one of those buckets, and then seeing if it's aligned with one viewpoint or with another viewpoint. So if you're slipping, just checking yourself back to, is this viewpoint, is it evidence, is it someone advocating something? And then the other thing you can do is you can caricature or exaggerate the various viewpoints in the passage to dumb them down, to simplify it, and to make it more engaging. So a lot of times I'll see that a common theme in reading comprehension is objectivism versus subjectivism as one common philosophical trope that they bring up again and again and again in the more academic humanities passages. And so if you can caricature those two camps, makes it easier to relate to.
Okay, yeah, I agree. And I've tried to become more active since the July LSAT, because I noticed that was a huge red flag for me and why I don't think I did very well. So now when I'm reading, I'm making sure to really, even though it might be boring and I'm not interested in the topics at all, especially when they're science passages, but I just try to just be engaged, pretend like this is the most interesting thing I've ever read in my life, so that I could do much better on answering the questions. So another question I did have is about how many practice tests do you recommend that we do, especially in the month up to the LSAT? I've heard some people recommend just doing 1 a week and really reviewing that one practice test. I've heard some people do 3 a week, 1 every other day. So what do you recommend for doing practice tests?
Yeah, sure. Well, part of it depends on your schedule. What's your schedule like between now and test day?
So I'm going to be in school, so it's definitely going to be tough, but I think I can, if I have to squeeze in more, I'll make the time. But yeah, it's definitely not going to be like the summertime where I have all this free time.
Sure. Yeah. So 3 a week is probably too much for most people because they
Yeah.
can't review it in sufficient depth. The only case I would recommend that for somebody is if they've already covered all the basics in excruciating detail and they have nothing else to be doing at all, period. No obligations of work or school or family or friends, which is really extreme, of course. I think that 1 a week is typically a good way to go. Maybe 2 a week if you have an empty schedule, but I think I would align more with 1 a week and reviewing in a lot of detail to get the most out of it, along with drilling weak areas, along with engaging in extremely detailed review of everything you get wrong, everything you have difficulty with, and maybe looking at some other resources in addition, but nothing more than that. At that point, you either know it or you don't. And so this is not an exam that you can cram for, and I'd rather you do 10 exams and review them in a lot of detail than do 30, but only skim the surface. So as for the overall question of how many tests should you absolutely complete in a given week or in a month before the exam, I would say that, let me just say in general, I think that you should complete at least 10 total, period, before test day. Now, if your exam is 1 month away, that gives you maybe doing two and a half a week on average, which is a lot. So maybe ideally you would have done some already, or you have a few months till your test date and you can push it a little bit. And you're taking the LSAT this fall, you've got 3 different test dates this fall to choose from. You could aim to do it in both October and November or September and November, and then you have a buffer.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And my last question was about logic games. So I find myself having trouble a lot with the global logic games because sometimes they're given like in the beginning, right after the orientation question, and I have nothing to really base it off of. So I try to save that towards the end and use the inferences that I've made through other questions to help me with that question. But is there a better method other than just like plugging and chugging? Because that's what I usually do with the answer choices, and it takes up a lot of time. So what are some tips on those types of questions?
Yeah, sure. So the biggest thing I would say first off is it is good to save global questions for the end if you're feeling lost, if you don't have an immediate jumping off point. And so the benefit of saving global questions till the end is that you have all that previous work available to you to help you avoid plugging and chugging as much as possible. You have the correct answer to your orientation question, the first question of the game. That is a valid scenario. All the hypotheticals you've drawn up to this point are also valid scenarios. So that could ideally help you eliminate at least a couple of choices. As for the remaining ones, you may have to plug and chug, aka brute force, by drawing more diagrams to evaluate, let's say, the remaining 3 answer choices. But you also might use your intuitions to some extent. Maybe there are some answer choices that seem relatively more likely than others based on the nature of the game. If there's a particularly powerful or influential single variable, you might look at choices referencing that one.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. I think that was all the questions I had for today. Thank you for your help and advice. I really appreciate it.
Of course, Mariana, my pleasure. What would you say is the biggest insight that you got out of our session today?
I think the biggest insight was on the reading comp because, like I said, that was one of my weaker sections. And I think if I think I have to do a better job at being active, like you said, and whether it's creating these caricatures in your head or whether it's just doing what you can to make the questions and the passage, the content itself more interesting, I think I'm definitely going to work on that when I do practice tests in the future.
Awesome, Mariana. I'm really glad to hear it.
Yeah, well, thank you.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.